Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Write or Die Show. I am your host, Randi-lee. On today's episode, I'm going to be talking to Paola Aguillon. And I'm sorry if I said your name wrong, but I tried really hard. She actually said that if I said it wrong, she wasn't going to correct me. But I still feel like I needed to say that because she is such a sweet, awesome person. And you're about to meet her. Welcome. So excited to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So where are you joining us from?
Oh, Texas.
Very nice.
Yes, Austin, Texas. Well, right now I'm in San Antonio, but I'm based out of Austin.
Very cool. And tell us a little bit about who you are.
Who I am? Well, for the accent, I'm French. I have been living in Texas since 1996. So I speak a little bit. Yeah, it's going to be a mix of things. It's always very interesting. So who I am, my goodness. I like to play with things. I like to discover things. I like puzzles.
Me too.
And there you go. Well, we were supposed to meet. I like to figure out how things work and how they connect together. So in the past 6 to 7 years, what's been very fascinating to me is how humans function. And not solely when it comes to the psychology of it, but also the cultural approach, how we interact with one another. So I do a lot of that work. And that's also a lot of that work that I bring as an Argentine tango teacher, because Argentine tango is really a metaphor for how we connect with one another. And it's very fascinating. So those two sort of overlap together.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And so what mental health have you dealt with in your life?
My goodness. I think
Big
I don't want to
question.
say
I know. Big question.
And it's fair though. This is what we're talking about, right? And I truly believe that the more we talk about it, the more we can normalize it, the more comfortable people are to say, hey, this is what I'm going through to. Am I normal? It's like, yeah, you're perfectly normal. Those are things that ideally we would talk about more often. We would have access to care so we can deal with it. And the people around us would be used to it, so they would know how to support us better. So anxiety, most of my life. I mean, absolutely skyrocketing through the roof. That was before we found out what introverts were and extroverts were. If I only had known when I was a kid that I was an introvert, I think my life would have been completely different. Like I would have never worked in retail.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. That's a hard one for an introvert.
I know, for 10 years. So I know. Talk about mental health right there. I know. I'm glad I did it. I found out a lot about people.
Good. Yes.
Yes, still. So anxiety, definitely bouts of depression that I'm coming out of, a long grieving process, and a grieving process that I truly believe was actually coming out of a lot of things that I've grieved through my life that I never allowed myself to really process, because we got to go and we have to shove it aside, and we don't know how to deal with it, and maybe we don't have a social support to deal with it, or the medical support to deal with it, because we dismiss it like, well, we'll get over it. It's going to be fine.
It's true.
That four-letter word.
Yeah. So let's talk about that a little bit more then, because I feel like that's what you're here on the show to talk about. I feel like that's your gift to us.
The grieving process?
The grieving process, yeah.
Yeah, if you have said that to me 3 years ago, I was like, no, thank you. But it's really interesting how things turns about. And I was going through my own process. It was taking much longer that I had decided it was going to take. Like I had given myself a deadline, because I'm that type of person. I'm type A.
Yeah.
I'm an over-accomplisher. I'm gonna get things done. And I'm a firstborn daughter. Okay. So if you have ever met firstborn daughter, we're different. There you go. we're a different deal, right?
Yeah.
So I had given myself a deadline to deal with this, and it didn't work. And then it kept going. It's like, oh my goodness, I'm never gonna see the end of this. I did start to notice that there was some things that I was doing differently, that there was some strength that I was developing, that my relationship to certain obstacles were not as difficult, or I was not getting as upset about it.
Okay.
So, right. And it was one of those mornings where everything is lined up. I have a morning routine.
Okay. I
Every
like
coach
routine.
will tell you, you have to have a routine in the morning. So I'm very strict with that. And my morning routine was going great that morning. And at the last minute, I was like, well, I think I'm getting a little bit stronger in some areas. I'm still struggling in some, but in some areas, I'm getting stronger. And I was wondering if it was just me. So I go on social media. I'm not going to name any of it, but I go on social media and I ask my friends, like, hey, have any of you noticed that you've developed some strength going through the grieving process? And I got an avalanche of responses.
Wow.
From people that had gone through various stages of grief, had lost a variety of people, went through medical experiences. There are all those categories that grief is going to encompass.
Yeah.
And that was really overwhelming. It was also very generous of them, because we're talking about something that's extremely sensitive.
Yeah.
And then I noticed that, well, wait a minute, I'm hearing all those ladies talk about grief. Mm-hmm. I'm not really getting any feedback from the gentlemen. And I know a lot of guys. It's not as if I surround myself with just women. It's like, I've got a pretty balanced social life here. So I went on a men's group that's dedicated to creating a safe space for men to be able to express their emotions, being vulnerable.
Okay, good. And
I'm part of that group. I know the founder. And like, hey, I'm getting all those responses from women about grief, but I'm not really getting any engagement. Like, I'm getting a comment here and there, but not real engagement, follow through with gentlemen. Is that okay if I post in the group asking for feedback? It's like, yeah, go ahead. Then I got some feedback. Then I've got extraordinary stories about what men are going through when it comes to mental health. And it's actually a different process because of the way our culture is set up. Obviously, they have a short end of the stick.
An example of the differences? An example of the differences?
A difference is that when we are in a patriarchal setting, the men are expected to be protectors and providers, and they are not allowed to show weakness unless they start being treated lesser than men. So if you're less than a man, that's okay. You can have feminine traits like showing emotions, showing sadness, fragility, vulnerability. So there is a tremendous challenge for men. It's pretty recent. It is not something that happened. It's not always been that way. I want to say between the last 20 to 40 years.
Yeah.
There has been that push for men. So you have to be strong, you have to provide. And if you show a tear, you're lesser than.
Yeah. I think so. I've been with my husband 14 years, and I think I've seen him shed a tear 3 times. And we've been to more than 3 funerals. So, yeah.
And some men don't cry naturally. I know some women don't cry.
Yeah.
Where we have to be careful is, are you not crying because you don't want the other man to think that you're lesser than?
Yeah.
And that's where there is an internal struggle of being within that male dimension. How are they allowed, or how do they allow themselves to be perceived so they can still be appreciated to the status that the society expects of us?
And I think that's such an important thing to point out to everyone who's listening right now, is that we as human beings are emotional creatures. Yeah. So when you suppress your emotions down, you're going to have this internal struggle, which can often lead to a mental health issue down the road
Oh
because
yeah.
you're trying to show something that you're not. Always showing that outward strength. Meanwhile, on the inside, you're crying and dying a little bit.
Yeah.
These conflicting things aren't going to hold together forever. Eventually, something has to give. And
Yeah.
usually that's our mental health.
Yes.
Yeah. So, you
Yeah.
know, I'm not saying everybody has to go and cry. I mean, I'm not a crier myself, but we need to recognize that we have emotions and recognize that if we are having a bad day or we are sad, to go, I'm sad. Like, you don't necessarily have to cry. You said it, not everybody's a crier, but
Right.
also you don't have to say, no, I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm fine. When you're not,
Yeah.
you're not fine. And
Yeah.
actually, on the flip side of that, if you are going to ask somebody, hey, how are you today? You need to be prepared for them to say that they're not fine.
And we're not. As a society, we don't want to hear that. We are crossing our fingers. And the irony of it, we in the United States very much ask people, how are you?
Yeah, it's part of the hello practice.
We don't say that in Europe. The first time somebody asked me in the US, how are you? I was like, do I look sick? I mean,
Really? They don't.
Oh yeah, we don't. No. French people we don't care about how people are doing.
You know what? At least it's honest.
We're very brutal like that. We don't
Honestly.
ask. We don't ask, how are you? We say hello, nice to meet you, see you later. We don't ask, how are you? We do it here, and then we're crossing our fingers. It's going to be, I'm fine, or I'm great, or I'm good.
That is so interesting, that cultural difference.
Yes.
Because I'm in Canada and we do the same thing. Hey, how are you? And if somebody says, oh, I'm not doing so well, you're like, oh, crap. Like, really, most of the time, and not always, because I mean, if I'm asking my friend or like my spouse or something, hey, how are you today? I'm genuinely interested. But when you're just saying, hey, how are you to, you know, a cashier because you're checking out at the grocery store, are you really there to find out how they are? No, you're just trying to be polite. But are you actually being polite if you're not willing to listen to the answer?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know.
The difference in cultures.
Oh, it's huge. Huge.
Yeah. So actually, because this is, you know, worldwide, the show on YouTube and on podcasts, tell us about where you are. Shoot a comment down in the comment section and let us know what it's like where you live. Do people say how are you as part of the hello process? And what do you think about it? Just give us a comment. Let us know.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's get some conversation going, because that's what the show is.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's get back to the grieving process that you were going through. Are you okay with telling us what you were grieving?
Well, sort of. It's always delicate, because something that I learned the hard way is that depending on what you're grieving, people react differently. So I had to do a whole chapter on that. It's actually labeled as disenfranchised grief. And we treat grievers differently depending on what they are grieving, regardless of how they are experiencing the loss.
That is very interesting. I've never thought about it, but now the wheels are turning in my head and I'm trying to think. Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
All
like
right.
if somebody tells you, oh, I lost my cat, it's like, oh. But if somebody tells you, I lost my mother, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Yeah. If somebody said, you know, I'm moving, it's like, oh, good for you. You know, the next place is surely exciting. It's going to be fantastic.
Yeah.
Moving is actually the second hardest thing and most traumatizing thing after death.
Really?
They did some research. So moving is actually very traumatic because it's a huge change.
It is.
That includes your entire environment.
Yeah. Especially somebody like you, right? Where you moved to a whole different country.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Like, it can be exciting at the same time that it's so difficult and traumatic. Yeah.
Absolutely. And the cultural adaptation, that was a whole different system. So it was interesting. I made a list in the book of disenfranchised griefs. And that does include, yes, the loss of a pet, but also the loss of a celebrity. When a celebrity dies, we are losing that relationship to what they were. And that can be, again, if it's a pop singer, are we going to have the same judgment when it comes to the griever than if it's Nelson Mandela? You know, Nelson Mandela passes away. We have a different approach to that loss as a community that if a pop singer dies and they have not really contributed at the philanthropic level, at humanitarian level, we judge from the outside really quickly. So something that I found out the hard way is that my grief was judged because, one, they didn't want me to tell them I was not doing well.
Yeah.
And it was not considered to be bad enough.
Really?
Absolutely. It was like, oh, better sooner than later. Oh, you'll do it again. Or you can rebuild that, no problem. So we get into some very interesting dynamics, even from extremely close friends who, of course, they want you to get better, but we are in that zone of get better and don't involve me because we don't know how to deal with it.
Yeah. And there's a lot of comparison, right?
Of course.
Like you said, oh, that's okay. Or the one that really, really bothers me is, oh, you don't have it that bad. This other person, they've got it way worse. And it's not to say that, okay, so a very simple example, because I'm sitting in my house and somebody else is sitting on the street. Yeah, they might have their living situation is harder. And it could be other stuff, but I'm only using like a very, very simplistic example here. I'm not trying to, say one person's better than the other. That's the point I'm making, is that we can't make that judgment, because just because a situation from the outside looks better or worse doesn't mean the situation on our inside is better or worse.
Yeah.
We can't see that. And that is the problem with the mental health and the stigma around it, is that people make these judgments like you're saying, but how can you cannot see what is happening inside of a person.
Yeah. And we're not even ready to listen to them and what's going on with them so we can be there with them. Brené Brown has done tremendous work when it comes to bringing us the knowledge that helps us connect with others. And empathy definitely is valid. I will argue that compassion is a lot easier to access and extremely powerful when it comes to somebody going through a hard time, let it be grieving or anything else. Yeah. Somebody said that if you empathize with somebody who's having a hard time, now you have two people that are deregulated instead of one. So it's another perspective when it comes to empathy. And empathy, real empathy, true empathy, is hard. It is hard to empathize with people. It is much easier to be compassionate. Yeah. So let's aim low but fair, and being compassionate towards someone and really giving the validation of what they're going through are two things that we can train ourselves to do, which is a lot easier to accomplish than empathizing, requires a lot less energy, and it helps tremendously when it comes to grieving.
Yeah.
It's huge.
Yeah, that's so good. So as you're talking, I just had this flashback memory that I'm going to share. I'm not going to name names, but but so my child, and I've mentioned lots of times on the show, my kid has autism, ADHD, anxiety, depression. And he's tried to hurt himself lots of times. He has tried to kill himself lots of times, and we've been in the hospital lots of times. It's one of the big reasons for this show is to help him as well. But I remember this one time he was in the hospital, and this was when I was working, like in an office. And I had went in and somebody else that works there said, I really empathize with you, but as soon as you say but, it doesn't matter what came after the but. It was
Right.
it was about getting work done and not seeming like I cared about work. Well, I'm sorry, my kid just tried to kill themselves. I kind of don't care about work right now. Just a thought. But
Yes.
if you say I empathize with you, but that means that you're not actually empathizing with them. You're using that as like a cushion, right? It's like, I'm going to push you down, but I'm going to put a cushion behind you. So that cushion is the empathy that I'm pretending I have. And here's my butt. And that's the push, right? I hope that this comment lands nicely. It's like when people say, no offense, but. Just because you put the but in there, just because you say no offense, doesn't mean that what comes after but isn't going to be offensive. If you know that, if you're going to say no offense, or in my case, I empathize, but don't say that first part of the sentence, because it doesn't matter that you're saying it, because it's not true
anymore.
As soon as you put that but, it's not true anymore. And it hurt that much worse. If she would have just said, hey, I'm glad that you're at work today. We need to make sure that whatever gets caught up, or, whatever paperwork, whatever the conversation was, I don't want to do details, right? But if she would have just said that and not pretended that there was empathy in there, it would have been easier to take.
Yeah.
And you've been saying it this whole time, is that they're not prepared, right? It's like we were talking about how are you? They're not prepared for the answer. And they're not prepared for people to be in the type of mental state that I was in at that time going into work, just trying to get through the day, trying to make sure that I didn't fall behind. Right.
Yeah.
So it's just something to think about for people, that if you are going to talk to somebody, you might not understand their situation. So empathy, and you've said it, empathy might be really, really hard to actually get to, but compassion is something that is a lot easier to have for somebody.
Absolutely. It's so easy to access, and it is extremely powerful to appreciate that somebody's having a hard time, regardless of why they're having a hard time. That we are judging somebody's emotional performance from a cultural point of view is not fair. So going back to men grieving, it is not fair that because we demand that men perform to a certain level, then they're not allowed to grieve the same way than anybody else. It's not fair. And we can sort of keep pushing that envelope only for so long before things start looking really bad.
Yeah.
So there are some things that people can do if they are willing, they really want to. And that's really what's at the beginning of it. Like, you can't make people drink the water. We can talk about it all day long. There must be a desire to do better, to show up better for one another, even if it's strangers, even if it's people within our line of work, or on the bus. There is absolutely no limit to it. When it comes to grieving, the worst things that can happen are the dismissal, the minimization. Those ones are huge. And the avoidance of it. So when we minimize somebody's pain, if we say, my dog died, I was like, well, that's no big deal. That just hurts like a knife in your heart.
It does. When my cat, and I've had a few cats pass away, because we've always had cats, and oftentimes we'll adopt the older ones, so they're not with us for as long. But I had one cat, and actually, if anybody's read my Diamond the Cat book, it's based on her.
Oh.
I had her from grade 7 up till 2 years ago. I had her for nearly 20 years.
Oh my goodness.
I don't really remember not having her.
Wow.
So when she did pass away, I was broken. I was grieving so hard.
Yeah.
when people tell me, actually, I had somebody that needed to reschedule their interview because their pet ended up passing away. And I'm like, yeah, no problem. Right. That to me, that was, and I've had grandparents pass away and it was hard, but they were old. And I mean, my cat was old too, but with your pet, you see them every single day.
Yeah.
Right. She was a very large part of my life. If I was cooking, she was right there. Going to sleep at night, she slept with me, right on my pillow or right on my chest. And as much as I do have other cats still, and I've got some dogs, none of the other cats snuggle the way she does, right? Because they all have their own personalities.
Yeah.
And so when you lose a pet, it's a knife to the heart. And
It is.
for people to minimize it or dismiss it, I think it's usually because they just don't understand.
It is, they don't want the hard conversation. They want answers. Our brain can be our worst enemy because we want to feel safe. And the best way to feel safe is to think that we have all the answers. Mm-hmm. And if we don't have an answer, we're going to make one up. And if we can get away with it, we're going to stick with that. So maybe they don't want to remember the time when they lost a pet. They don't want to go back to that moment. And that is something that definitely was true to me, that I had conversation with close friends and I was shocked at the answer that I received from them because I remembered them going through the same thing. And I was like, well, they're the perfect, ideally, they would be the perfect person to talk to because they went through it, except they didn't want to go back there.
Yeah.
And so I got to dismiss them.
Yeah. And I can totally see their side of it too. I don't like going back to the missing my kitty cat to the moment. Like I laid with her on the floor until she passed away all night long. So, to remember those things, or when my grandma died, I wasn't in the hospital room with her, but my mom and my aunt were like right there. Right. So I understand that reliving it can be very traumatic all on its own. But let's come back to that honesty part then. So instead of dismissing or minimizing somebody, say, you know what? I'm not in a place to share this grief with you right now. I'm not in a place to share this moment with you. I'm so sorry. I emotionally, mentally can't handle it. I know it hurts for you, but I can't do that. Be honest.
Yep. Be honest, and then we're going back. You don't have to empathize with me. Give me compassion. I'll be happy with that.
Exactly. And being honest and showing that compassion makes the person, at least I know, I would feel a lot better knowing that, okay, you're not saying that my feelings aren't valid right now. You're saying that you've hurt so much too that you can't relive that hurt again. I can get that. I can totally understand not wanting to relive your hurt again. So, to me, that's a much nicer answer than going, oh, it was just a pet, or, oh, it was their time. And for some people, that is a comfort to know that it was their time. For some people, that's a comfort, but for some, it's not, right? And it's a very dismissive response.
There is a very visceral experience that happens when we get those responses because we can feel right away in the tone, in the body language. We're human, we're emotional beings, we are so animals. We're very, at the biology level, we react to micro movements, to micro expressions, even if we're not able to intellectualize it, even if we don't know how to process it very specifically. We can feel it. We know when there is an attitude of warmth or distancing or dismissal. And that is something we can train ourselves to avoid doing so we can be more present. So even if there are, and I made a list in the book of things not to say, which is actually a much longer list of things that you could say, or that we could say to a griever, is like, don't say those things. just avoid them. Yeah. So we can train ourselves to be more ready whenever that happens. A little bit like, it's not, I don't want to say it's like having tricks in your back pocket. It's more like having a toolbox of items ready to go. You're ready.
Mhm.
and you know already how you can interact with somebody. And frankly, on several occasions when I was having a conversation with someone, I didn't say anything. I just looked at them in the eyes, and then I put my hand on their arms, and that was it.
Yeah.
And they said, Paula, that's all I needed.
Yeah. I think that's such a good point because in our society, going back to that cultural differences, we feel the need to fill the silence with something.
Yeah.
And sometimes the absolute best thing you can do for somebody is literally just being there.
Yeah.
Right? We don't need words a lot of time. We just need a body there to know that we're not alone.
Absolutely.
And I know, like, when I'm depressed, I don't want to talk, but I also don't want to be alone. Right? Or sometimes I
Yeah.
just go to my husband, I'm like, I need a hug.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to talk to you. I don't need any of that. Give me a hug and then you go off, play video games. I'm good. But yeah, we feel the need in our society to not only fill silence, but to give advice, which is
Oh my goodness.
you. No, don't never give somebody, I'm sorry, never give somebody advice for it. If somebody's like, hey, I need your advice on this, yeah, give it to them because they want it. But if they're not asking for it and you start going, well, you know what you should do? When somebody says that to me, I'm automatically like, oh, what else do I have to do? Oh, look at that pretty bird. I'm not listening to you. I didn't want your advice.
Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
wanted you to be there, maybe to listen to me vent sometimes, right? We just need to vent it out, cry it out, say, wow, that sucks. That's
Yeah.
one of the things to hear when I'm feeling depressed or during the time that I was grieving. It was just my friends to go, that really effing sucks.
Validation.
Yeah, that's just
And
it.
it's not that hard. We just, for some reason, have forgotten to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
That's it. Just validating somebody's experience and appreciating that they're telling you they're going through a rough time. And you said, yes. That's
Exactly.
basically what we're doing. It is that simple. The fixing part, so minimizing, dismissal, fixing part is huge because we want, and I feel for the loved ones, the ones that are not specifically grieving, the ones that are not directly affected by the loss, because we want the people that we love to feel better. And grieving sometimes can last a really long time. It can be a month, it can be a year, it can be 10 years.
Yeah.
So we have to appreciate the fact that we love someone, they're in pain, and we're going to have to deal with the idea that there is very little we can do about it. We're not going to be able to speed that process up. There is no magic wand that is going to make that grief goes away.
Yeah.
Grief never goes away.
Yeah.
That's the thing that we need to be very clear and be ready with ourselves so we can stop trying to put it aside, shove it down, or imagine that it doesn't exist. It never goes away. It is not as hard. It's not as sharp. It doesn't come around as often, but it never goes away.
Yeah.
So the sooner we get ready for it, the better prepared we are to actually embrace it in a way that is productive for us and it's helpful for people that we care about.
Yeah. That is such a great way to say it because there's times even now. So my grandma passed away, I don't know, 6 years ago. I'm not good at keeping the dates, but it's been a while. But when she was passing away, I was telling her all about my new business that I was starting and all this stuff. And she was so excited for me.
Oh, nice.
Even now, like when I started the show, I was like, oh, I got to tell grandma. Well, grandma hasn't been around for like 6 years, but she was the person that was so on board with me doing, whatever it was for starting a business, or I mean, this really isn't a business. Maybe one day it'll be a business, but
you never know.
been like, wow, that is so cool that you're doing that. Right. So I wanted to tell her, but I can't, not in person anyway.
Not in person.
And so, yeah, that, and then it gives me back that sense of grief of, oh yeah, she's gone.
Yeah.
But it's easier to live with. Like you said, you just sort of, it becomes part of your life now. Yeah.
Yes. And it's something that we need to be very okay to not beat ourselves up when it comes to how we process that grief.
Yeah.
That is something that happens quite a bit, is that as if it wasn't enough to be judged by others, we judge ourselves.
Well, like you said, you gave yourself a timeline of how long it's yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, no, it didn't work that way. And talking to different people in various with various stories and various loss, we tend to do that. We tend to do that, and it's perfectly fine to not be okay. Let it be with grief or with something else. It's perfectly fine to not be okay, and we need to honor ourselves in that fashion. That the reason why we're grieving something is because we loved it very much.
Yeah.
And that is something that is rare. That is something that deserves to be honored. So in that grieving process that we have forgotten as a culture to really honor and be present with, as someone who loses, or as someone who loves somebody who lost, we had the opportunity to educate ourselves so we can get better at it, get better educated, and have a more fulfilling experience. I think we cheat ourselves a great deal, not being ready to lose, not being ready to grieve, trying to do it by ourselves, maybe, not having safe spaces to talk about it. There are some spaces, depending on your loss, that are there for you. I have a friend that specializes in infertility, and that includes miscarriages. So we have spaces, for example, for women that go through the miscarriage. We have no space for the men.
Yeah, because
Ah,
they're often forgotten in that process, but
they're completely, I mean, they don't even belong to the picture. And I understand that biologically the loss is obviously on the woman.
yeah,
However, that dream of a child,
yeah,
that expectation, that projection, that excitement, that love that there was in the possibility of a child, of a family,
yeah,
the man experiences it too. And they are completely put aside when it comes to the needs that they have and the support that they could have when it comes to that situation. Again, and not fair, because they're expected to be the strong one who doesn't cry and is supposed to make it happen.
yeah. Yeah, I never thought about that before. That's part of the problem, is that we don't always see the whole picture.
Yeah. So I'm hoping we can have those conversations, definitely, so we can see where we can have more supports in some areas. And I know I'm mentioning men's a lot, but, this is where there is definitely an area of opportunity, as we used to say
Yes,
it,
exactly.
where it is like, hey, they're there too, they're struggling too, they're allowed to have some support and consideration as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what are some of the coping skills that you used for yourself during this process?
Oh my goodness. Well, I did have that extra glass of wine here and there that I really didn't need.
We're
But
not
it was,
saying, I just need to preface this with, we're not saying that alcohol is a good coping mechanism.
there you go. Exactly. I want
Put
to be
that
very
little
clear about this.
disclaimer in there, yeah.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with you. They are coping mechanism, and then they are falling into very bad habits.
Yeah.
So there you go. So coping mechanism, yeah, an extra glass of wine, an extra cookie. That was mostly it for a while. It's just, and then I do a lot of reading in general when it comes to psychology and to human dynamics, and that's where it was really helpful. when it came to writing the book, but also continuing that conversation. When I interviewed all those people for the book, there was a variety of stories. I also had the feeling that they needed to be honored sooner rather than later. I didn't want to just keep that information to myself much longer. Like that book needed to be written, it needed to be published, and needed to become available as possible. There was also that opportunity that, well, we can always write a second one.
There you go. That's so true.
Or a second edition.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We can keep going on the subject, but really all those stories, they needed to happen. They needed to take place because it kept coming over and over and over again that this is not being addressed. This is not being given the consideration that it deserves. There are too many instances where we can do so much better in ways that are as easy as validate. You know, that doesn't require that much of a habit turning when it comes to it. So being able to do that research, being able to one at a time, finding those people that had grieved well, that were really able to have that conversation with me, sit down, not dismissing, not minimizing, not trying to fix me or fix me up, God forbid. So to really I know, but that was the story of one of the ladies that I interviewed. It was really, they did. Yes, they did. So having this conversation, finding those people that really grieved well and are absolutely comfortable sitting with you, having that conversation with you, and letting you have all the time you need
support
to talk about it.
Yeah, it's a support system.
It's a support system. So depending on what we lose, we may have a support system in place, we may not. And that's why it gets tricky if we don't have one.
But there are groups out there. Yeah, there are some groups out there. You might have to look a little bit for them, but they are out there.
Yes. Yeah, so it does take some research. But little by little, and the more we talk about it, the easier they're going to be to find. Exactly.
So what would you tell somebody who is experiencing a loss right now or some kind of big change, right? And they're going through the grieving process?
Well, regardless of what's going on, it's completely normal. It's going to take however much time it's going to take. And we only grieve what we love. And we're lucky to find things that we love very much. And that's at the beginning. And I wouldn't say the following to everyone. And that's why in the book, there is a sequencing to it, but I also separated the chapters in a way that people can actually pinpoint wherever they're at on their journey.
Good. That's really good.
Yeah. So it's like, okay, you're there. You can read that, because if you're not ready to hear it, it is not going to work. But the hard one is that we need to get used to suffer. That suffering is something we need to be okay with. And unfortunately, especially in our culture, we are doing a fantastic job at making sure that the slightest discomfort is eliminated right away.
Yes. Yeah. And I can't remember where it was, and I'm not going to say the quote exactly the way that I heard it because I don't 100% remember it, but it was something about you cannot experience happiness without sadness.
Yeah.
And so, and you said it, at least you found something that you loved, even if it wasn't forever.
Yeah. Now, if we said that at the beginning of a grieving process.
Yeah, no.
So there are different things to say at different stages. And definitely remember in my process, somebody has said that at the beginning, that would not have worked out at all.
I might have to slap somebody.
So we have to be very careful. And that's what I'm saying. So, yes, we need to start getting used to suffer, and we need to stop minding the suffering.
Yeah.
We can't say that to somebody who just lost something that they adored. It is not going to fly. That would be cruel, actually.
It would be, yeah.
Yes, in my book. Now that we have that established, in the long run, as soon as we can embrace that idea, we're going to get stronger, more resilient. We're going to be more open-minded.
Mm-hmm.
And we're really going to show up in life for ourselves and for others in ways that we have never done before.
Yeah. That
But
is
we need to get there.
Yeah. And what is the name of your book?
The title?
Yeah.
Oh, Shut Up and Listen, A Journey of Grief and Loss.
Love it. Where do people pick up a copy of this book with a fabulous title?
Oh, you're so sweet. It's available on Amazon in every English publishing country. And also, if the ones prefer to buy independently, it's on lulu.com, which is an independent publisher. So those are the two sources. For the people that live in Austin, Texas, they can pick it up at Book People. Shameless plug.
No, that's great. Always shameless plug.
Locally owned bookstore, one of the last ones. So
yeah, we gotta help those out. I mean, I'm a little far to go to that one, but I mean, you gotta help out those local stores. So
yes,
are gonna be in the description down below, so that you can really easily find that book. It sounds like it's a great tool, and everybody should pick it up, because at some point in your life, you will experience grief. At some point in your life, you will know somebody who has experienced grief. So, I mean, the book is really for everybody.
Yeah.
And where can people follow you? You've got to be somewhere.
I am in places. So my website is paolaessential.com, and then my social platforms are linked at the top.
Perfect. And of course, that link will be down in the description below as well, so that you can follow and stay up to date with all of the fabulous stuff that is still to come.
Yes, I am so excited for you. This is going to be great. Yes.
I'm loving this show, and I hope everybody watching is enjoying watching it. I enjoyed doing it.
Good.
Thank you so much for being on the show and sharing.
Thank you for having me.
See, I told you she was a sweet and awesome person. She was so lovely, so fun to talk to. We ended up talking for another 5 minutes afterwards, which of course will be posted for some behind the scenes on our Patreon page. So if you are not already a patron, you may want to head over there and support the channel, get some behind the scenes footage. As well, make sure that you check out those links of hers in the description below, right? We want to make sure that we show all of these amazing authors and amazing people some love. If you have not already, hit that like and subscribe button here at the Write or Die channel. And of course, we do have merch, and 10% of those proceeds goes to the Canadian Mental Health Association. And remember, the only way to end the stigma of mental health is to speak openly and honestly.